Want to achieve network marketing success? Then you're in the right company. Hello, and welcome to Leave Nothing to Chance, hosted by networking marketing giant John Solleder. Learn everything you need to know about the network marketing space from somebody who's actually done it. Join us every week for front row seats as we feature some of the finest and most successful personalities in network marketing. Leave nothing to chance. Join us now.
Hey, it is my pleasure to welcome to Leaving Nothing to Chance, Alan Questel. Alan, how are you today?
I'm very good. How are you doing today?
I'm great, Alan. I'm going to tell people a little bit about you. I'm going to
Sure.
brag about you a little bit. I'm going to use my notes though on my other computer. So I just want to tell them a little bit about you, that you're known for your clarity, your creativity, your down-to-earth style of teaching, depth of understanding, humor, gentle humor and perspective while creating lively conditions for learning. You've taught thousands of people in over 20 countries on 5 continents, and you were trained by Dr. Feldenkrais himself, who created numerous Feldenkrais programs on numerous topics, including one for pregnant women called Pregnant Pauses. You're the author of Creating Creativity, Embodying the Creative Process. You're still discovering how to be kinder towards others as well as yourself. And that's part of our topic today, because I think we all, we're living at some crazy times, certainly. And I think we all need to learn how to be nice to ourselves as other, if you're not nice to you, you can't really be nice to other folks. So, and you have a new book out that we want to talk about as well. So, I don't even know where to start, but I think, why don't we just start at the top, because not everybody is aware of Dr. Feldenkrais.
Right. So Dr. Feldenkrais was a really interesting man. He was a physicist, an engineer, mathematician, one of the first Westerners to get a black belt in Judo. And through his own knee injuries, he developed this method called the Feldenkrais Method. And he destroyed his knees playing soccer as a young man. And he would do anything to win the game, he said, even if it killed him, and it nearly did. And he couldn't figure out why some days his knees hurt and some days they didn't hurt. And then some days one knee would hurt and some days the other. And he became his own laboratory trying to figure out what he was doing. And he was applying his understanding of physics and the prevalent understanding of neurology at the time. And he finally realized on the days his knees didn't hurt, he moved his pelvis differently. And he was able to walk. And later on, as life went on, he encountered other challenges. And he always had bad knees till the day he died. But his big intention was, how do I do what I want to do? How do I fulfill my intentions? And as I said, he became a black belt in Judo, was actually one of the first Westerners to get a black belt in Judo. And he developed this method, and I came to it hurting my back. I was an actor. And my acting teacher recommended this guy, and I thought it was nonsense, but I went, and he was barely touching me, and I thought it was a waste of time and money, and I got up and I had no pain. And 3 days later, I still had no pain, and I was driving on the FDR Drive in New York, which is like a pinball machine for cars, and I noticed I wasn't getting angry when people cut me off. And I thought, what happened to me? I couldn't figure it out. And I went back to this guy. And after the 3rd time, I thought, oh, I want to learn this. I bet I could do this part-time and pursue acting. And I had a contracting business, which I wasn't crazy about. And I was lucky to get into the last training that Dr. Feldenkrais taught in 1980. And that's all I've done ever since. So it's been pretty good to me.
Well, I can't let the mention of Judo go, because most of my listeners know Judo's been a huge part of my life, probably saved my life when I was young, but today the show's about you. Some people know my story, some don't, but Judo was got me on the straight and narrow, so to speak, got me to go to college and do some things, and influenced by some great judokas, as well as 2 great senseis in particular. But Dr. Feldenkrais actually knew Dr. Kano, the founder of Judo.
Yeah. The way he met him is super interesting. So at the time, Feldenkrais was living in Palestine. I don't know if it was Israel yet or not. And they brought someone in. He was part of the Haganah, the secret army there. And they brought someone in from Germany to teach them jujitsu. And they studied it. And 6 months later, there was an attack. And the ones who tried to use jujitsu, they got killed, because 6 months is not enough time to practice it. It's life's work. And so Feldenkrais had this is his thinking, how brilliant he was. He would hide in doorways and alleyways and jump out and frighten people.
Hmm.
And he would see what position would they reflexively put themselves in. And from there, he'd figure out how to break a man's neck. And he wrote a book. The original title was 50 Ways to Break a Man's Neck. Now it's called Unarmed Combat. But it's a violent book in a sense. I mean, it's about protecting yourself in an aggressive way. And he was studying in Paris, and he was at the Sorbonne working with Julia Curie in the nuclear physics lab. And Kano was visiting Paris, and he went there. And of course, he had no invitation, and they wouldn't let him in. And he said, "Well, here's my book." And he gave them the book, and the next day, Kano invited him. And Kano said to him, "You know, your book is very interesting, but there's one move with a knife that won't work." And Moshe said, "No, no, they all work." And he said, "No, it won't work." He said, "I'll show you." And he did it with Kano, and it worked. And you know, at that time, and still today, there's that quality in Asian cultures about saving face. And this was a moment where it was a tricky moment. When Moshe threw him and showed him he could protect himself from that knife, he said, "Well, now I've taught you something. What can you teach me?" And that was the beginning of his studies in judo. It was a lifelong influence on the work I was talking about before, the Feldenkrais method. One easy example, like in many martial arts, in judo, I could take someone by the little toe and throw the whole person. And the Feldenkrais method, which is used for people who have all kinds of pain, neurological problems, issues around or changes in self-image, professional athletes, actors, dancers, what I can do is take someone by their little toe and connect that movement all the way through them. And the key word there is connection. And it was the same in judo too, right? And so what does that afford us? Well, if movement can connect more effectively through us skeletally, it turns out that functioning improves, pain is diminished or even goes away, self-image changes. And I add my own little tweak to it at the end, which is that people like themselves more, right? From that quality of feeling in themselves and being able to do what they want to do more and more effectively.
What's amazing is, you know, when you talk about, you know, Dr. Feldenkrais, Dr. Kano, Renaissance men, you know, these guys had multiplicities of skills and they knew each other. It's kind of like Edison and Tesla, you know, these guys were, you know, you can only imagine being a fly on the wall and they, you know, in conversations at the level they were at, and then they probably say, "Hey, you want to go get a beer?" You know, and they were just normal guys after that, but they were performing at that incredible level. I think our world would be blessed with more folks like that these days. I'm sure you agree.
Sure.
You know, so let's talk about this, because your new book, right? Practice intentional acts of kindness and like yourself more. It's a great title. It's such a compelling title. When I heard it, I said, I've got to interview Alan.
Right.
So let's talk about the book a little bit. I've got a few subjects from the book I'd like to reference, if I may.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So let's start at the top, because, you know, when we talk about judo, okay, and we talk about life, right? That word balance is very, very important to both.
Yeah.
Talk about balance a little bit.
Balance. Well, balance is actually an explanatory principle. What does that mean? So an explanatory principle is like gravity. Gravity is something that we all understand. We can drop something and see the effects of gravity, but you can't hold it in your hands. It's an amorphous thing. It's a description of a phenomenon, right? And balance is the same thing. And in fact, most people don't even really consider much about their balance, except for two situations. One, when they start to lose their balance, right? And the other, when they're doing some kind of thing like slack rope or tightrope where they need it, a very heightened sense of balance. But that's the minority. Most of us don't think about our balance until we start falling. And then the funny thing about balance is when we can talk about it in terms of falling, which relates to judo as well. The question is, one question I ask people when I'm teaching, what's the difference between falling and moving.
Hmm.
And people will say loss of balance. And it's actually when you walk, you're continually losing your balance and regaining it. So that's not the answer.
Sure.
The only thing that's different between falling and movement is falling is irreversible.
Hmm.
You can't return. So in martial arts, when you fall, you learn to recognize that moment and instead of feeling out of control, gain volition over it and turn that fall into something else. Now, when we speak about balance specifically, like as a phenomena, and this is true of most dictionary definitions, they're described from the observer's point of view, not from the point of view of the experience of it. So to understand something of balance, I mean, it's a really complex thing, but it needs to be a relationship between stability and mobility. Now, there's a third option in there, which is instability. That's falling when someone is unstable. In Feldenkrais, we're always looking about this relationship between mobility and stability, not either or, but a blending. So it's a dynamic stability or a mobile stability or a stable mobility. And how do we find that? That's the next question. And so it's one of the things the Feldenkrais method explores actually in depth, and it's by using ourselves more skeletally.
Mm.
So the skeleton, in a movement, this function of the skeleton is to bear weight and transmit force. And we tend to underuse that and overuse our musculature. And so in a Feldenkrais private lesson or in a class, there's a gentle deconstruction of the muscular habits that allows movement to connect more easily through someone's skeleton so that we have more balance. And I would say that one term that I would add to balance that people don't consider that's, again, a kind of a key word in the Feldenkrais method is reversibility. So if I start to fall, how far do I go before I can pull myself back?
Hmm.
Or how far do I go before I lose control and turn it into something else? So that when I think of balance with people, when people lack balance or feel unstable, unfortunately, the first response is to hold themselves, to try to tighten themselves. So if they feel themselves falling, they pull away from the ground. You know who gets the fewest injuries when they fall to the ground? You'll get a kick out of this.
I would probably, well, besides people who play judo for
Yeah,
years,
right.
I would probably say kids because they don't fall that far.
That's true, but as adults, the people who hurt themselves the least are drunks.
Yeah, because they don't brace themselves.
Drunks.
Yeah.
They fall and they just keep going. They don't try to pull away. Kids too, up to a certain age, right? But that idea of stabilizing myself, the more stable I make myself, the more easily I topple over, the less balance I actually have. So there we come back to that idea of increasing one's mobility and reversibility through movement in a way that when they fall, they don't plant their face on the floor. Actually, I was teaching in Italy and I was teaching all this stuff on falling. And actually, you know, in the Feldenkrais method, there are lessons about judo rolls too, and headstands. So it can get quite complex. And this one woman came back came back to class the next day and she said, I fell and I felt it and I just kind of skidded to the ground and I didn't hit my head.
Wow.
And so, but all of that to happen is a dynamic relationship that can be learned. That's the most important thing. You know, I'm working with someone right now who has Parkinson's disease and very challenged balance. And I've shown her a number of ways that she can get up and down from a chair, from the floor, and also to feel both. I don't know why Zoom does that.
That's
Did you see that?
yeah.
I can't make it happen. It just happens.
It's actually pretty cool.
Yeah, it is. There's balloons too that go off sometimes too. So I'm showing her how, because when I work with someone who's lacking balance and I work with them, one of the things they say is, oh, this now feels unstable. And I say, does it feel unstable or more mobile? Oh no, more mobile. Yeah,
Hmm.
you can feel the difference. So it's those relationships that we play with. Now, all I can do is talk about it, right? My job, and actually probably one of the most genius things about Feldenkrais was his ability to take an abstract idea and give someone a concrete experience of it.
Hmm.
So I'm happy to talk about it, but when someone has the experience of it, where they can do something that they couldn't do before and become more balanced, that's a real learning and a testament to the method and to their self-image as well.
You know, it's such an interesting thing. And let's stay on falling for a minute if we can, Alan, because like my own mother made it to, she died at 92 until 85. She was great.
Yeah,
And then she got a phone call. Her sneaker was untied. She stepped on her own other sneaker,
yeah,
broke her hip.
yeah,
And after that, the next 7 years were not good. And then
yeah,
she passed away. And until 85, I mean, if you spoke to this woman, you'd think she was 65. She was involved in her church. She was involved in her town. She was involved in politics. She just
yeah,
very active senior citizen. But the
right,
second that happened, her life changed. So a lot of our people that listen to the show, you know, we're getting up there. I'm 62. I mean,
right.
63 in a couple months. A lot of our people are older than that. A lot of people a little bit younger.
I'm I'm
Everybody,
I'm 70 now.
are you really? Wow,
Yeah,
great. Another reason we need to start doing some Feldenkrais.
yeah, yeah, right.
So that being the case, though, okay, I think it's so important that with falling, if people can find, not that we want to fall, right, but at the end of the day, that falling, like in judo, it's part of the sport and it's part of our training. I mean,
Mhm.
I've probably fallen 10,000 times in my life, you know, on purpose, literally, where
Yeah,
you know,
yeah,
you're doing practice back and forth, and you let
right,
your workout partner throw you, and then you throw him, and you know
right.
that's part of learning. But I don't know if I'd want to do that at 62, some of the stuff I did. But having said that, falling is such a fear, not only the physical falling,
Yeah,
but also metaphorically the mental falling,
yeah,
right? Gee, I'm not as sharp as I used to be as I'm getting older.
right.
You know, the synapses in the brain aren't working the same, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah,
So talk about that, if you would, from the standpoint of how does somebody get over that fear so
yeah.
that they keep living as they get older?
Well, I mean, how each individual gets over it's going to be a little bit different. But there are some fundamental things that can help someone feel more comfortable moving through space. Let me put it that way. And one of the first things is being a little bit friendlier with the ground. So, there have been studies that when they talk about aging now, they talk about one measure of how vital you still are is your ability to get up and down from the ground. So how do we do that, right? So then it's a question of technique, right? So then I don't think Feldenkrais is the only thing out there that teaches something like this. But what Feldenkrais will do will teach it in a way that's both novel and connected through the whole person. So even though they may be coming to help themselves really not fall, right? They find that their walking improves, which again, as I mentioned, walking can be seen as a controlled falling, or getting in and out of a chair. When you get into a chair, most people fall into the chair as they get older. I would say that if we looked at it simply from a mechanical point of view, and I'm going to talk about it skeletally, but it doesn't exclude the muscular activity, which moves our skeleton, is that where do we need to move more freely to not fall? And I'd say it's one place. Matter of fact, the last workshop I recorded was called Move Like a Peaceful Ninja.
Hmm.
And it explores different ideas of martial arts and movement. We're using martial arts as a kind of a theme for the whole thing. Our hip joints is one of the most significant axes of movement for anything that we do, and it's a hidden joint, right? So it's where our leg connects to our torso. You can't touch your hip joint. Like I can touch my elbow, my wrist, my jaw, all that I can feel the skeleton. You can't touch your hip joint, and people don't know where it is. And one workshop I have is called Getting Hip, and it's about finding your hip joints. And I was teaching it in Switzerland, and when I was recording it, and I say to people after each lesson, "How do you feel?" "Oh, I feel my neck, my back, my feet." I said, "Your hip joints?" Maybe. And then I started teaching in Asia, like Taiwan and Japan, where they can really move in their hip joints, but they don't know where they are. And if you don't know where it is, you don't have any access to control it, to move around that point. So if you think of the Dantian or the Hara or where the chi collects, that's all in the general area of the pelvis. And when we think of like the pelvis moving, most people's image of it is in the lower back. But actually it's in the hip joints, more significantly in the hip joints. So once we can move in these places, then we can really change something and feel less fearful. So I'll tell you a brief story. When Moshe was at a judo conference in England many years ago, and someone asked the sensei, would you please talk about the tanden? And the sensei said, I think Dr. Feldenkrais could answer it in a way that's better for you to understand. So he got up there first, he was kind of joking. He said, well, the hara, this stuff, this is a magical thing that if 1 in a million people get if they practice for 20 years. And then he said, I don't know what it is, but here's the concrete part. But when someone has it, they can move their head and their pelvis in any relationship to each other. So the head, we're oriented to the head, right? The pelvis, those are the large muscles that begin in action. So if you know how to connect those points and move with those things connected, you have, not that you have, yeah, you have less of a chance of falling, or I would say you have a better chance of not hurting yourself when you fall. That's the more significant thing.
You know, it's funny you say that about being able to get up as an older person off the floor. I'm sure you're familiar with Dan Boutner and the work that he's done with National Geographic with the Blue Zones.
Oh yeah.
And you know, the 5 regions, I think there's 6 now. They just identified a 6th one. But it's funny because when you watch Dan's stuff, and I've read his books and I watched a couple of documentaries, that's one of the things is that, you know, these 100-year-old people in some of these cultures, they'll sit on the floor and, you know, drink tea together, and then they're able to get up. I mean, they may not jump up like a 20-year-old would, but they have the ability to get up without leaning on something or anything else. So what you're talking about is boy, it's right on point, especially, you know, as not only are we an aging population, but people are living longer, which is the good news. But the bad news is, do you want to be in a wheelchair, or do you want to be, you know, confined to a couch all day? Do you want to be out playing with your grandkids, you know? So let me ask you, Alan, let's go to this question. How about the moment where we begin?
Yeah. Well, that speaks right to the hip joints and the pelvis. That means, so that's kind of, it can be, you know, we can talk about the moment where we begin in a lot of different ways, but I would look at it from the point of view that I'm talking about, is where and how we initiate a movement. Where we begin. So if I reach, like, look, here's a little bit of anatomy. Okay, so if I ask someone, where does your arm begin and end? Almost everyone will point to their fingers and their shoulder, and that's correct. That's the arm, right? And we need that for Simon Says and things like that, right? But then when you learn skeletal anatomy, you'll learn that the arm begins at the sternoclavicular joint and includes the collarbone and the shoulder blade. And that makes sense when you look at the kind of yoke of our structure and how it's put together. But when I look at a kid reaching, a little kid, they never reach from their shoulder. They never reach from their collarbone and scapula. When you watch them reach, it's their pelvis moving their arm through space. So their arm is actually free. So there's a good example of the moment where we begin in judo and Feldenkrais as a violinist, as an athlete, as a housekeeper. Any one of us will move more efficiently if we initiate a movement around our pelvis, skeletally through the hip joints, muscularly through the larger muscles which reside there. Because if the larger muscles work, then the rest of the system doesn't have to work as much. So the moment where we begin is a kind of a training for life, meaning I'm still improving with that, right? So when I get out of a chair, it's, yes, my feet have to push into the ground, but it's an action in my hip joints and pelvis that actually can help me lift and make it reversible again. So it's some of the things I teach almost everybody how to get in and out of a chair,
Hmm.
because and the older we get, the more we struggle with that, you know. So the moment where we begin is about the initiation. And in a private lesson, you know, there's two modalities in the Feldenkrais method. One is functional integration, which Moshe developed first. And that was what he did with himself and started playing around with other people. And then he thought, well, there's so many people I can touch in a day. So he developed these classes. And I would say when I'm working with someone, I work with them fully clothed on a low table, and I start to move them. The movements I make are really tiny, and already I can feel someone's hand. So I'm trying to interface around the moment where they begin the initiation of the action. And if a change can be made there, what kind of change? That the change becomes connected differently through them, that more of them participates, everything improves from there.
Hmm.
So, and actually, the classwork is one of the things that led me to the idea of liking ourselves more. And I think the Feldenkrais method affords such an unusual way to experience that, because I was putting together a workshop on self-image. And the more I investigated it, the more I thought our self-image is a reflection of how much we like ourselves or how much we don't like ourselves. So if I like myself, I have a good self-image. If I don't, not such a good self-image. And then after a while, I started thinking, this is my job to help people like themselves more. And I do it through the Feldenkrais method. I would imagine your podcast affords people an opportunity to understand something or learn something about themselves to help them feel better about themselves,
Mm-hmm.
right? Why would we spend time doing all these extracurricular things if it didn't reward us in some way? And so, as I said in the classwork, which is called Awareness and Movement, you're doing these very small, repetitive movements with a lot of attention. And I started asking the question. I said, are you moving in a way that you like the way it feels? And if the answer is yes, great. But if not, that's significant, because we don't practice that enough. So in my book, I actually talk about, how do you like yourself more? It's not so easy, right? Generally, we do it through external things. You get a new car, new hat, new partner, new apartment. All those things work, but they're temporary. I don't know if you ever had the experience of buying a new car and you
Sure.
drive around for a year feeling, this is great. I love this car. And then a year goes by and then there's the next model. And you're looking out the window, oh, I wish I had. That's crazy. You have a new car still. It's a year old. It runs fine. And so all of those things of liking ourselves more in our everyday life are attached to everyday outcomes. They
Hmm.
can be compared to others. But if you just move in a way that you like the way it feels, that's between you and you. And if you improve that over time, that changes something dramatically. Probably the best example of that I have is a group a Feldenkrais training, which is most of my work now. It's 4 years long. And I was graduating a group in Australia, and I was calling them up and giving them their certificate and a hug. And so many people whispered in my ear, I like myself more. And I thought, that's kind of a foundational idea of being more of who we want ourselves to be. Because if we don't like ourselves, it's a struggle. And our whole culture is built to measure it with all the likes on Facebook and Instagram and stuff. And it's kind of like, phew, let's take a breath and see if we can kind of enter into ourselves through the back door and build something that's more substantial that no one can take away from you. They can take away your car, your house. They can't take away the quality of movement you experience.
Great, great, love it. Let's talk about the pleasure of the challenge.
The pleasure of challenge. Um, so you're naming some of my Feldenkrais
Uh-huh.
workshops, which is great. And I was always looking for themes to engage people, right? And so, because Feldenkrais will help you with your neck pain and lower back pain and your stroke and all this other stuff and your golf game. But if I can contextualize it in a more neutral way, so pleasure of challenge and the challenge of pleasure is exactly that. I was looking for lessons that gave people a chance, this is going to sound weird, to tolerate more pleasure.
Hmm.
And people say, what do you mean tolerate? And I go, all of us have a threshold where if things get too good, we get nervous, you know? So to feel, create the circumstances to feel more and more pleasure. And then challenge, because life is very challenging, of course. We're not going to eliminate challenge. How do we engage in it? Can we engage, let's say, in a physical challenge in a way that it doesn't injure ourselves, right? That we know ourselves well enough to be able to move back and forth between these different ideas of pleasure and challenge. But I'll tell you a funny story. The first time I taught, one of the first times I taught that workshop, I taught just a one-day workshop called The Pleasure of Challenge. And I had about 40 people in the workshop. But as they're coming in, they're on canes, walkers, and I'm like, oh my God, I'm going to kill them. Because these were going to be challenging lessons. And they got through it. Some of them even walked out without their canes. And
Wow.
there were some other Feldenkrais practitioners there, and they said, I can't believe you taught those lessons. And I said, me neither, but it worked. And again, it's a testament to the method of how people can be guided through something to make the impossible more possible and the possible easy. And as Moshe said, make the easy more elegant. So, but you know, can I make a segue here?
Sure.
So, you know, you mentioned my book in the beginning, so I'm going to bring it up from this point of view. So the book is Practice Intentional Acts of Kindness and Like Yourself More. And in the beginning, I talk a lot about, you think that this book is going to be easy, but I'm pretty sure it's going to be pretty challenging. And you're going to have to hang in there with that, right? And so what does it mean to stay with the challenge, to persevere, to not give up, right? And of course, along that, to not have the internal dialogue of I'm no good and I'll never succeed, but just to keep going, you know, and finding small changes, beginning in different ways, and seeing if we can meet the challenge in a way that there's levels of approximation of success. So it's not all or nothing. I'm a little bit better. I like myself a little bit more. I can fall a little bit, or I can reverse my movement a little bit more easily. That these things, they're all part of challenge, but then like in the book, in each chapter, I talk about different aspects of kindness or liking ourselves more. I give you things to do every day. And you know what? They're challenging. They should be challenging if they're going to change us in some way. If everything fits us perfectly from the beginning, imagine if you went to a judo club and from the beginning you could do everything. In a few months you'd be bored, you'd leave, you know. But as someone who practices judo, you know that there's always another level, another stage of improvement, another improvement in quality and something like that. I can give you an example of the challenge. So in the book, there's one chapter on generosity. And one of the exercises I suggest, and I go into it in a lot more depth, but one of the exercises I suggest is when you tip, however much you tip, for every $5, give one more dollar. If you can afford it, it's always within your means, right? So I'm writing this chapter, and that night I go out to, I'm literally writing it. I go out to dinner with some friends, a local place, and I pick up the check. It's about $70. And I normally tip 20%, so that's about $85. And I have a $100 bill. And I think, I'm going to give the $100 bill. And the next moment I clutched. I was like, you can't do that. That's crazy. You know, it's 15. What's wrong with you? I was really challenged with my own idea. I mean, it was kind of crazy making. And I just went, I'm going to do it. And it wasn't easy. I really felt it was hard to leave that there. But the cool thing, when I left the restaurant, the waitress stopped me. She said, you just made my night. And I thought, ah. So challenge is a worthwhile thing. And I think we all need to learn to navigate it better, you know.
You know, you brought up a lot of valuable points there, but I'll just add one from
Yeah.
my own judo life. I got I earned my first degree black belt in 1992, and I was building a sales organization with a company out of Toronto, and we had opened up Australia and New Zealand, and ultimately we would do business in Japan. But I figured, well, you know what? Let me go to the Kodokan, and I can actually pick up my certificate in Japanese, my diploma. And
Cool.
of course, having a Japanese sensei, he had all the connections back there. So we set it up, and I went to the Kodokan, and I'm one of the few Westerners, you know,
Yeah.
there. And the way that they lined you up, at least then, I don't know, I've been there many years, but the older guys were on one end of the mat, and you had a belt partition, and the younger guys were, you know, out here where, you know, you're really doing randori and going, you know, going full speed, and, you know, the 70, 80-year-old guy, you're not going to go
Right.
throw. And if you did, you were in big trouble. But anyway,
Right.
what happened was, so you know, of course, you know, the different Japanese judokas that were there, you know, when that spoke English, you know, when did you get your belt? Oh, just recently. Oh, great. And I'll never forget, eighth or ninth degree black belt there, who spoke
Yeah.
perfect English. He was a business guy, and he said to me, "Now you have actually started to learn judo."
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, I've broken bones. I've had spinal cord surgery. I've had shoulder surgery. I've had knee surgery multiple times. I've invested all sorts of money back in this sport. I'm still doing it, even though I'm in at that point, my early 30s. And at first, I was a little taken aback, to be very honest with you. I'm thinking, well, I've achieved something. Like, you know, I'm a Westerner with a black belt, and you
Right.
guys sport. Like, this is your sport. You guys created this
Right.
sport, which is more than a sport, as you and I both know. But we won't get too into that right now. You know, there's a lot more to judo than just that in terms of
Sure.
thought process and philosophy. And it's a beautiful philosophy. But, you know, he said that to me, and to your point, it was like, he's absolutely right. Now you actually know something. You have a foundation,
Right.
but you really know nothing compared to the guys on that other side of the mat that have been doing this for 50 years.
Yeah.
Some of which at that point knew Kano when he was still alive.
Wow.
Even, you know, some of them had Olympic medals. Okay. And you're thinking, you know, something, and I don't care whether it's judo, but it's a great metaphor for everything else in life. When you think you know everything, you find out you know a little. You don't know what you think
That's
you
right.
know, you know.
Absolutely. I
You
can't
know,
remember. There's a story about Bruce Lee like that, where someone asked him what belt he was. He said, I think he said, I'm a white belt. And he said, if you're really learning something, you're a white belt, and you get the black belt, and then you get the white belt again.
yeah.
And you realize, I mean, well, the work I teach, yeah, I'm successful. I'm good at it, I guess, you know, but the more I do it, the more I think, wow, I don't really know very much, you know?
Well, don't you find as we get older, because we're in the same age group. You got a couple years on me, but you know, life is like an alchemy set. You know, it's like it's always morphing and
Yeah.
changing, whether it's professionally or whether it's in relationships or whether it's just in our diet or whatever. That
Yeah.
there's always something else that, you know, you go, well, does this or does this not agree with me personally? It might be great for my next door neighbor, but it may not be
Right.
great for me, or vice versa, you know. So
You
what
know, when you say that, I go back to your question about balance. And I would say another way of looking at not falling, being balanced, is how adaptable we are. So, like you mentioned, how in judo there's much more than the movement. There's the philosophy and things like that. And most great practices that I've seen, the philosophy revolves a lot about adaptability. And look, in business, isn't that what we need to do? Things are going wrong all the time. Every day something happens. You got to, how do I fix that? How do I fix that? You know, but now, if someone was going to teach a class in adaptability, they'd probably get a lot of theory, maybe some clever ideas. But physically, if you learn something physically, the sense of what adaptability means is different, right? So, for example, the so much of our culture is built on a cognitive understanding. So I said before that Feldenkrais was really brilliant and making the abstract concrete. Right. So the abstract, we know that's the cognitive understanding of something. But then the concrete understanding. So I can talk about dynamic stability or stable mobility, blah, 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 blah. But when I give you the experience of it, then you understand something differently. And those two things, the cognitive and experiential, may not sync up for many years. But when they do, I believe that's a truer sense of understanding something, knowing something. You know?
Agreed.
Yeah.
Well, let's look at this one. And I don't know if you were a Star Trek fan or not, but I'm guessing maybe you were at some point. May the Force go through you.
Oh, that was Star Wars.
Star Wars.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, I was a Star Wars fan. You know, the funny thing about that is the title, May the Force Go Through You. When I was recording it in Switzerland, they said, we can't use that title here. I said, why? Because it translates into something very religious.
Huh.
So I can't remember what they changed it to. But May the Force Go Through You is exactly what I spoke about before, is the transmission of movement and force through our skeleton. And where it doesn't go through our skeleton easily, that's usually evident of some muscular habit that if that can be quieted down and deconstructed in some way, then the movement goes through us more, right? And so that feeling of connection happens. And the funny thing is, like, if you watch a basketball game or a great judokan or someone who's a great bricklayer or something like that, it looks so effortless that you don't see how it happens, right? And so when we feel it, you know, this is a bizarre thing because I teach people primarily through movement, right? And if I ask the question, what's the quality of an ideal movement? And they'll say efficient, and they'll say it's pleasurable, and they'll say it was fast, or anyway, all their answers are correct. But really, in an ideal movement, there would be an example of the force going through you. In an ideal movement, nothing stands out. There's the absence of noticing something. If I throw something in the wastebasket and it lands, I don't go, wow, I felt my weight shift and my back turn and my arm length. It's like, oh, I felt like I didn't do anything. I'm surprised by it. In sports, they'll talk about that as the zone. But the problem with books like On the Zone, which I've read, is like, yeah, nice idea. How? How do you do it? That's the thing. Same thing with liking yourself more. How do you do it? It needs practice. You know, it's not something that's just going to happen because you want it to happen. Because if you want it to happen, if I want it, I can speak personally. When I've wanted it to happen, each step of the way actually gets more challenging. You know, and that surprises me. You know, when I wrote the books, I had no idea what I was doing, in the sense that the outcome of where it would put me in my life. Because everything I write about in the book, about liking yourself, being kind, honestly, I feel pretty adept at that. Now, the next level, I hope I make it to see it, you know.
It's well, it's back to that judo analogy, right? Oh, I thought I knew something,
Right, exactly. Yeah.
You know, let's use a judo philosophy for a second, because most Westerners, unfortunately, and I have people around the world that watch the show, but most of them are North American people, and they don't know judo. They think, like, first thing anybody says was when you play judo, oh, you can you kick somebody? No, we don't kick anybody in judo. Sorry. Do you punch people? No, we don't punch people either. What do we do? We throw people.
Yeah.
Well, how do you do that? Well, believe it or not, judo's literal translation, Japanese to English, is the gentle way, right? And there's nothing about judo that's gentle, but as a philosophy, it's gentle because we're out to help each other. I'm going to throw you in practice, and then you're going to replicate my throw, and we're going to do an ippon seinagi, or we're going to do whatever throw you're practicing at the moment. Is 64 of them. And let's look at that for a second and say that gentle way with Feldenkrais, okay? Because it's probably not easy either. People probably get up sometimes afterwards and say, wow, that hurt. but all of a sudden they stand up and go, well, that shoulder pain I had for 20 years is gone.
Yeah.
A woman birthing a baby is a beautiful
Right.
thing once the baby is out.
Right.
You and I haven't given birth, but we know people who
Right.
have, right? I mean,
Yeah.
my wife went through, some torment for 19 hours with one of our kids. And all of a sudden you get this beautiful child, right? So to get to that end point of the kindness or the gentility or the thing that you want, that we all want, we got to go through some pain. Reference that for a minute.
Okay. So when I think of the gentle way, so in my book about kindness, there's many ideas about being kind to others, but then there's a whole part about being kind to ourselves. And to be honest with you, when I started writing that, I got blocked for about 5 years. And I realized there was a lot I needed to learn and understand. I thought I was kind to myself, but I think, and even if I think that now, I think, yeah, I am. Could be better, in terms of doing that. But one of the more significant ways of being gentle with ourselves is that I think through our internal conversations. Now, I can look at it in exercise too, where people push themselves too hard and end up injuring themselves. Like, what's the value of that? When I read the book K2, I'm like, why? What? I mean, well, I don't get it. I like skiing down steep hills and stuff and scuba diving and doing things that are kind of dangerous sports, but I'm not there to prove to someone else how much I can do it. So to be gentle with ourselves, I would say, as I said before, moving in a way that you like the way it feels. Not all the time, but a few times a day. That's being gentle with ourselves, right? I think the internal conversations, being able to catch them and interrupt them and shift them. That's an adaptation. That's not falling into the pit of the loop of my endless thoughts of what's wrong with me and being able to go, can I gently pull myself out of it without judging myself so much? When I think of kindness in general, I have one chapter on tough love, right? Which is a different kind of kindness. If someone's been an alcoholic, you don't offer them a drink. And if they want one, say no. Not no because you can't. No, because I care about you. Right? So I think that gentleness is an act towards others. As a matter of fact, the idea of kindness, it's been generated for me in a number of ways. But one way that I connected it to liking ourselves more was I did some small act of kindness. I don't even remember what it was. And in the next moment, I realized I feel better. I like myself more for doing that. And it's not to do acts of kindness so I can pat myself on the back. It's that those acts help someone else smile. It makes their life a little bit easier or acknowledged in some way. And I don't know, is there a violent act of kindness? I can't imagine that. I think they're all gentle, at least in the spirit of them, hopefully, in doing something like that. And even when you said that judo wasn't gentle in practice, I actually disagree. I think that compared to something like karate or some other martial arts, where you're breaking into them in some way as opposed to using their force against themselves. That's like almost like an invitation. Oh, you want to come at me? Okay, keep going. It's like that's a gentle way. Yeah, kind, you're throwing them to the floor, I don't know. But it's not as aggressive, as some other martial arts or sports like that.
Well, and one of the things it is too is that you're helping each other. Like
Yeah.
whether you're training or whether you're actually competing,
Yeah.
in Japanese, when you thank each other at the end,
Yeah.
and it's very formal. And as a Westerner, when I was a kid when I started, fortunately, but some people started as adults, so I understood.
Right.
And because I grew up, with a Japanese sensei, I understood cleanliness of the dojo, cleanliness of your uniform, cleanliness of your hands, because you are touching another human being. And whether that person throws you for ippon, or whether you throw them for ippon, or it's just a tight match and you lose, you bow to each other. because it's about respect, right? You know, to respect each other. And it's something that we as Westerners need to apply a little bit more, I think, in our own philosophy. Not about judo. I mean, judo is a very small sport.
Right.
It's the philosophy of being nice to other people. Because you get, like, when you gave that waitress $100 or $30 tip, you know, you don't know that money didn't put gas in her car that she couldn't put in.
Yeah,
You know, you don't know what
absolutely.
the end was, you know, and you're thinking, oh, $30. Okay, I over tipped her for 5 minutes. You thought about it, and then you went, it's $30, right?
Yeah.
And that's the point. That's what I love. So that's why I love what you're talking about. Let's talk about how they get the book, most importantly, and how they can
Sure.
tap into some of the consciousness of not only Dr. Feldenkrais, but by extension, your tremendous work. And I love what I've seen the other night and looked at. I actually filled out the questionnaire, by the way. I don't know if you actually see that stuff or
Oh
goes to,
yeah, good.
you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
and well,
So
I use my own example from your example. We adopted 4 dogs
wow.
and rescue dogs that were found in parks and things here in Dallas. And at first I was against it. Well, we've had dogs throughout our married life, but I said to my wife, I said, we want to travel now. Our kids are 19, 20, and 28. The 28-year-old lives in California. So, like, now's our time. I want to go here and I want to go there. And we are a little bit, but 4 dogs. And we have 4 cats on top of it that I don't even talk about. But the 4 dogs, the other day was a freezing cold day here. And the 2 little ones that are Chiweenies, they're sitting on my lap, keeping me warm. I'm keeping them warm. We're watching TV together.
Yeah.
And the love that those animals show,
Yeah.
that you know, back to you, it's like, yeah, you adopted them, they adopted you too.
Yeah.
You know, and whether it's an animal, another human being, a homeless person, you know, we have so many people in need and so many animals in need, for that matter, in our country right now, you know. But I love that. But anyway, let's talk about the practice intentional acts of kindness and like yourself more. How did they get the book, and how do they tap into resources?
So they can go to the website, which is practicing-kindness.com, and there's a lot of information about stuff. You can get a sample worksheet there, which is, I think, what you downloaded, and get some idea of the direction of the book. And it's all sold at Amazon as a paperback, I like to say, a Kindle instead of a Kindle, because it's a Kindle, and also as an audiobook as well. And also there is my other book called Creating Creativity, Embodying the Creative Process, which was originally about acting in Feldenkrais, and I decided to broaden it to the creative process. And there I'm looking at some very specific ideas in the creative process, and then giving people a concrete experience of it, as I was talking about before. So the cognitive and the experiential understanding of it. And then my other website, uncommonsensing.com, is more my Feldenkrais website, and you can, a lot of the stuff we were talking about here, a lot of the questions you asked, the names of my workshops, and you can find many more there. And you can always reach me through the websites as well.
Well, we're going to include all of that because as we talk here, all of this is notarized and diarized by our podcast company. So if you didn't get all that, folks, just go to the show notes and you'll be able to see everything Alan just referenced there. And now I know, before I let you run, you got a crazy schedule coming up here. You were telling me earlier. So where are you off to? I mean, 4 countries.
I'm off on Monday. I'm off to Belgium for 2 weeks, where I have a Feldenkrais training program, and then I'm in France for 2 weeks in the south for another training program I have there. It's ending its 2nd year, and then after that I go to Switzerland, which is the place where I record all my workshops, and I also teach advanced trainings and supervision workshops practitioners. So I travel about 5-6 months of the year, all over the place. So.
And then you're going to Taiwan, I think, too. Right?
Yeah, Taiwan. I was just there in December, November, December. Now I'm planning on starting a training there beginning in May. So yeah, I get around, and that's for 4 years when I commit to that, where I go like Taiwan for a month at a time, twice a year for 4 years. So it's keeps me busy. That's for sure.
Let's ask a fun question, because you are all over the world. What's your if you had to say, what's your favorite place in the world?
Someone just asked me that yesterday. Fiji.
Oh, okay.
Fiji. Fiji. when I would teach in Australia, it used to be a free stopover. So I got to go there a few times. And then I had 2 programs in Australia with a week off, and I would go scuba diving there. But Fiji is one of the most gorgeous places, and the people are just sweet and great, and the diving is great. If you dive, the snorkeling is great. So I haven't been there for a while, but I really love Fiji. Yeah.
Great, great, great. Well, Alan, this has been a pleasure, my friend. And just hang on here as we sign off. I'm going to ask you one last quick question here. Yeah. We'll just do a little housekeeping for the show and the dates and all that stuff. But advice to our listeners, okay? And we've got listeners. Let me kind of, I don't know all my listeners. Obviously, there's thousands of them, fortunately, around the world, and so I don't know them all. But if I had to profile them, here's a couple things they have in common.
Yeah.
Most of them are in business for themselves. There's what you might call a solopreneur. They're in direct selling companies, many different direct selling companies that they represent. Okay, so they work for themselves like you and I do. And this has been what I've done for a business for 41 years myself. So there are people who are very into improving themselves. Most of them, I could say all of them, but I'll just say most of them, are into not only self-development, but also into their health. Yeah. Feldenkrais sounds like something that we all should be looking at for a variety of reasons, right? It's part of a health regimen. Is this something that they can find locally if they Google it, where they can find a local Feldenkrais teacher? Yeah. Maybe one of your disciples? Should they go to your website? How would they find that?
So they can just Google Feldenkrais.com, which is the Feldenkrais Guild of North America. And there's a listing of all the members and different, you can search by location or name. And usually there's someone nearby when they do that. And if they're interested in self-development, Feldenkrais had an interesting definition of health. He said, for most dictionaries, being healthy is not being sick. But one of his definitions was you can measure someone's health by how quickly they recover from a trauma or an accident. So now we're back to adaptability again, sustainability. So if someone's interested in their health, through movement is such a significant way to make a difference. And then I think, honestly, on an emotional level, if you want to like yourself more, it's through kindness that you'll feel healthier and happier with yourself. I don't know of any better way to develop ourselves. And the idea of liking ourselves more, I've never met someone who doesn't want to like themselves more. I've never met someone who doesn't want to feel better in their movement. These are kind of fundamental things to all cultures, not just to us. So they can be really valuable. So I recommend, regardless of whether you pursue Feldenkrais or my book or anything like that, that you look at what are some of the fundamental things you want to become and how do you pursue that?
Great. Well, thank you once again. It's been a pleasure, my friend, and safe travels. And hang on one second here. We'll turn off the recording. And
thanks very much for having me. I really enjoyed our conversation.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Leave Nothing to Chance. If you want to know more about what it takes to succeed in the network marketing space, join us again next week for another amazing episode. For additional resources and to connect with John Solleder, visit leavingnothingtochance.com. Don't forget to leave a review, and we'll see you next time.